Horror stories have always been part of our history. Being English myself, ghost stories have played an enormous part in our culture. Here, it was once tradition to gather around the fire on Christmas Eve to share scary stories before bed. We may be the country that birthed so many horror stories that are now told worldwide, but we are by no means the only lovers of the world's dark corners. Scary stories are not a part of any one culture. They are a part of all human civilization, whether through books, campfire tales, films, or even podcasts. I often wonder about the urban legends that may have existed so long ago that they'll never have their tales told again. What wonders did the world believe to once be true that are now lost to time? What tales were shared as reality around the fires of our ancient civilizations? Today, things are different. With the creation of the internet came a wave of information that has never been seen before. Whereas a story may have taken years to make its way across the seas and into new lands, it can now happen in seconds at the click of a button. I wonder whether the future of urban legends will continue to grow at such new speeds. Moreover, in doing so, will the lifespan of a legend burn out faster after shining so bright with such intensity? Perhaps some will even make a return. Perhaps you've heard of legends in this series that you have not heard before. Something you would never have heard without the internet age. I am proud to say that I am now part of the expansion of legends into new territories around the world. But as the legends grow, I find it fascinating that one of the most famous urban legends of our time was born, lived and died in front of our very eyes. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Slender Man. With the amount of information available at our fingertips at any one time, you would think our knowledge would be shooting through the roof with a far greater understanding of the world. This, in theory, is correct, but it does not take into account the consistency of human error that occurs daily. Not to mention those that purposely invent stories to share amongst the world to either push an agenda they hold or play with the minds of those in society around them. Our confirmation biases blind us from the true stories that do not fit our narratives, whilst also leaving ourselves susceptible to lies that fit our already decided worldview. A scary story invented for fun on the internet, with its origins so easy to find if you wish to see it, would indeed not be held with any credence in reality, and it certainly wouldn't be taken too seriously by the public. That's what you'd think. And yet, this eerie being was brought to life so vividly that, in some ways, he truly did step into the real world, leaving his dark mark in our history books. It seems strange and almost unrealistic to even comprehend that somebody would take seriously an idea whose origins are so easily traced. Yet, there are entire religions that can be traced back to stories created in the last century. If a faith-based society can be born out of a recent story, who is to say a ghostly being could not come to life in the same way? In my telling of a fictionalized tale in the world of Slender Man, we will span over 2 generations as we follow Scott's encounters with the mysterious entity. The blue light of the supermarket sign was glowing brightly through the smudged window of the back seat of the car. The rain was pouring heavily outside, causing the sound of 1,000 tiny drums to continuously patter against the metal above. Scott was sitting in the back seat, his seatbelt still secure as he played on his Game Boy that he had gotten for Christmas the month before. The year was 1999, and 10-year-old Scott was waiting for his mother to return from the weekly shop. He'd asked her if he could stay in the car playing his game while she ran inside, and she agreed, telling him there should only be a moment and that he should, under no circumstances, wind down the car windows or attempt to open the door for anybody but her. He had agreed and pulled out his Game Boy, still sitting in his school uniform from the day. The early night of January had already taken over the sky, leaving Scott with no choice but to lean as close as he could to the window, raising his Game Boy to an uncomfortable position in an attempt to see the screen clearly under the yellow streetlight above. At this stage, his mother could have been gone for 10 or 30 minutes. He was so engrossed in his game that time passed him by with a great indifference. His mind was intensely focused on the game at hand, desperate to catch them all and complete the game. But unfortunately for him, the dark forces of the shadows had other plans for the young boy. The streetlight above the car began to flicker, fluttering into light and dark as it struggled to stay alight in the rain outside. Scott hissed to himself in frustration, unbuckling his seatbelt while sliding across to the other side of the car, hoping to catch the glow of the nearest light across the quiet car park. But it was no use. He sighed again, a panic growing over him that only existed in a child's mind whilst playing a video game. He slid back to where he was, hoping the flickering would eventually stop. And it did, although not in the way that he had hoped. The light above had flickered off, engulfing the car in darkness. He switched off the Game Boy and placed it on the chair beside him, frustrated that he now had to stop what he was doing when he was making such significant progress. The time had begun to slow now he had no distractions to keep him occupied, and every passing second seemed to spread across minutes. He turned to the window beside him, watching the rain pouring heavily against the glass, noticing the occasional shadowy figure pacing towards their car from the supermarket, trying to keep out of the rain as much as possible. Its intensity had cleared the roads as those in the supermarket stayed inside. That was, apart from one man. Scott's eyes changed focus from the raindrops to the parking spaces ahead, where he noticed the slight silhouette of a bald man standing amongst the shadow. It looked as if this man was in a suit, although he did not seem disturbed by the rain. Scott sat up, studying the man for a moment, unsure what he was looking at. He couldn't make out any features on the man's face, although he could tell he was pale, thin, and very tall. And although he couldn't see this man's eyes, it seemed as though he was studying Scott through the window from afar, simply standing there, watching him. Scott slumped into his chair, now growing uncomfortable and unsure of what he could see. He wondered if what he was looking at was just an abandoned mannequin. That would explain why it seemed to have no face and was so pale, bold, and was so unfazed by the cold rain in a simple suit. He slowly sat up again to look at it. And there it was, still standing in the same spot, seemingly staring at him. Before Scott could get a clearer vision of whatever it was standing in the shadow, its nearest streetlight suddenly flickered into darkness, engulfing whatever it was into the black of the night. Scott just sat there, studying its position through the distortion of the rainy window, waiting and hoping for the light to flicker once more to reveal it again. Except now, there had been a new development. Under the pitter-patter of the heavy rain that surrounded him, he hadn't noticed that something was now scraping against the bottom of the car. He jumped back into his seat, instinctually lifting his feet from the floor, holding his knees against his chest as he listened, feeling the vibrations of the steel below as whatever was down there began to move. As if spreading, the sound grew louder and broader as it stretched across the bottom of the car, finally revealing itself as it began to crawl up the door frames and windows. It was hard for Scott to understand and comprehend what he could see, let alone explain it. It was as if the car was being wrapped around and gripped by thick, long, black tentacle-like appendages as the metal creaked around him, failing under the pressure of its firm grip. Scott screamed for help as loud as he could, his eyes filled with tears in his terrified state. He shouted and called into the empty darkness of the car park, but each scream was muffled by the security of the car doors, mixed with the heavy rain outside, evaporating each decibel into white noise. He spun in his chair, continuing to scream in the hopes that someone, somewhere would hear him, but as he did, he finally saw it out of the rear window of the vehicle. Now, only a few feet away from the car, the pale man was standing in an empty parking spot. Scott froze, now seeing that whatever it was no man. Its suit was dark and fitted, its skin was white and smooth, and its face was featureless. No hair, eyes, or lips were in their expected places. It stood at least 7.5 feet tall, simply staring into the horrified eyes of Scott, its large black appendages reaching out from somewhere on its body, stretching out to the car and squeezing it tightly. Scott no longer screamed, studying the creature that still seemed to stand so effortlessly against the rain, doing nothing but watching. He slid down into his chair, giving up. The fear had engulfed him entirely, and his fight or flight response had shut down in shock and horror. He instead simply placed his hands over his ears to avoid the sounds of the creaks and cracks of the glass and metal around him whilst he rocked himself, desperately wishing for whatever this was to go away. But as he did, he felt a sudden cold breeze as the car door flung open. "What the hell are you doing?" his mum asked as she pushed the trolley towards the car boot. Scott shot up in horror and confusion, desperate to warn his mother about what was happening. But he was not met with a terrified woman coming to save him. He was greeted by an impatient, frustrated woman who was desperately trying to fill up the boot of her car during the pouring rain that drenched her. The car was not bent or broken, and the glass was clear and intact. Scott turned in his seat, staring into the darkness of the boot that was now up, covering the view from the rear window. His mum slammed it shut, pushing the trolley aside before darting into the car with haste. But behind her was nothing. No sign of the slender man that had begun to stalk Scott that night. No sign of his tentacles. No sign of his pale face. No sign of its dread. For years, Scott would fear the imagery of the suited man in some capacity. He would never show it whilst hanging around the town centre with his friends, passing by the mannequins in the windows of suit shops, smartly dressed and menacingly faceless. He would never share his story, nor allow himself to relive the haunting events during that short wait. Eventually, the memory itself had begun to fade into nothing but a bad dream brought to life by the overactive imagination of a young man playing too many video games. This is how Scott lived for many years. That was until 22 Novembers had come to pass. It was the 6th of November when Scott, now a grown man, began making his way upstairs to his son's bedroom to tell him that it was time to go to bed. They'd been to a fireworks show, and the sky's explosions continued throughout the night. Bonfire night had been the night before, but as today was a Saturday, the local events had waited 24 hours before celebrating altogether. Scott and his son Adam had scoffed down several burgers and drank far too much hot chocolate whilst enjoying the display amongst the night sky, which had been tiring for him. He needed a moment to himself, so he had allowed his 10-year-old son to sit upstairs playing video games for a little while before bed. And now, that time had come. He gently pushed Adam's bedroom door open to see his son sitting in the darkness of the room, only lit by the glow of the computer screen in front of him. "You shouldn't sit in the dark looking at the screen. It's bad for your eyes," he said, walking to the lamp by Adam's bed and flicking it on. "Is it bedtime?" Adam asked, disappointed although accepting the terms of the agreement. "Yes, son," Scott replied as he edged closer to the screen to see what his son was doing. But before he could take any more steps, his entire body froze. He didn't understand why, but the very sight of what he could see caused his body to seize up in fear as he stared at the white glow of the screen ahead. "What is that? What were you looking at?" he asked, trying to sound as calm as possible, clearly showing his fear and discomfort with it. Adam turned in his chair, looking back at his dad curiously. It's something my friend's sister sent me. It's Slender Man." Scott finally stepped forward, gripping his son's shoulder with worry and concern as he studied the various artistic interpretations of the creature that had tortured him for so many years in his childhood. Now brought to life like a fictional character on the web. "It's an old legend," Adam added, clearly concerned he was about to get into trouble for looking it up. "I don't want you looking at this," Scott suddenly snapped, waving his finger at the screen as if to dismiss its existence before leaning forward, flicking off the computer at the wall. Scott told Adam to brush his teeth and get ready for bed, before pacing into his bedroom, perching himself at the edge of the bed and rubbing his face in discomfort. In an instant, it seemed as though the very image of the pale man had ripped open a sealed wound in Scott's mind, allowing the fear, anxiety, and horror to gush out into the world once more. He took a deep breath, telling himself there must be some misunderstanding or coincidence with what he had seen tonight and back then. Perhaps he'd remembered it wrong. Yeah, that must be it. He's imprinting new ideas onto old memories that are not to be trusted. After his prep talk to himself, he got back to his feet and fell back into the role of father. Stepping into the hall with a deep breath, he entered his son's room to see him, now in his pajamas, standing by the bedroom window, looking out into the darkness of the street. "All right, come on," Scott said casually as he whipped back the bedsheets for Adam to climb inside. He turned and jumped onto the bed, sliding into the sheets as Scott pulled them over his torso. "Right, you can read a book before bed if you want, but I want you trying to sleep in 15 minutes at most," Scott said gently but firmly as he kissed his forehead. He stood straight, smiling down at his son, who was now already rummaging through his bedside drawer to grab the adventure story he'd been recently reading. He pulled it out and sat up, adjusting his pillow as he opened the book in front of him. Although, at first, he did not read, as if his mind had wandered. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "He's not scary, Dad." Scott watched him curiously, asking, "Who?" Adam smiled reassuringly, nodding his head as he replied, "Slender Man. He's not bad, he's nice." Scott was made even more uncomfortable in the situation, not only by these words, but by the strange sincerity of how Adam was saying it, as if he was defending a friend who was rough around the edges. He nodded back, uncomfortable, confused, and unwilling to engage in this any further. Scott opened his mouth to say goodnight, lifting his head with a sigh as he did, but before the words could come out, he noticed what Adam was doing by the window. Outside, amongst the shadow of the trees, was Slender Man, staring up at the house, once again watching Scott's every move, statue-like and controlled. A cold spike shot through Scott's entire body as his breath left his lungs in its entirety. He looked down at his son again, who was now trying to find the bend in the page that he was last on. He was completely unaware of what his father had just seen. It was no longer just him he was fighting for, it was his son. He could not freeze and hope for it to pass again. Who's to say he would be so lucky twice? Instead, Scott turned, darting out of the bedroom and pacing down the stairs. He flung open the front door of the house, walking into the shadow of the garden, listening carefully to the soft whistle of the wind against the winter air, only disturbed by the occasional bang of fireworks in the distance. Although, amongst it all, lit under the soft glow of the moonlight, Slender Man was gone. He spun on the spot, ready to put up a fight in a battle he knew he would not win but needed to try, although it seemed that the pale man had other plans. Scott froze, suddenly feeling a stab of horror in his stomach, somehow understanding that nothing the Slender Man does is for fun or by chance. There is a plan, an understanding, a goal. even if the agenda exists beyond all human comprehension. He was outside because Slender Man wanted him outside. He sharply turned, looking up at his son's bedroom window to see he was now standing against the glass, watching his father with a concerned and confused expression, whilst the bedside lamp behind him began to flicker, just like the car park years before. Scott screamed in horror before pacing towards the front door of the house. He barged it open just before it could slowly close in the wind. He darted up the stairs and onto the landing. He screamed his son's name, desperate to hear a response. The bed was unmade, where Adam had just climbed out. The book was placed gently on the bedside table, lit by the light that sat calmly above it. The computer was off, the windows were shut, and the atmosphere was calm, although little Adam was nowhere to be seen. Scott would pace around the house, screaming his son's name. He would venture out into the woods trying to find him, first alone and then with the police before being joined by the whole town, but his son would never show. Scott would never understand why the Slender Man took his son and what he wanted with him. He did not know if it was vengeance for once getting away from its mysterious grip. He didn't know if the Slender Man would one day return for him also, or if this was the punishment itself. Could it be that his son was the target all along? That Slender Man somehow knew that this day would come and was drawn to him for that reason all those years ago? In truth, no matter what conclusion Scott came to or how many theories flung through his battered mind each day and night, he would never know for sure. What use is there in trying to find logical reasoning in a being that defies all logic? Despite much of the tale of Slender Man holding evident qualities that reside in most folklore throughout time, the mysterious being itself is not actually in the public domain. This is one of the few reasons that some consider the tale of Slender Man to be what is deemed fake lore rather than folklore. Genuine folklore is said to have developed organically from stories passed about by ordinary people. For example, the Victorian sightings of Spring Hill Jack that I previously covered. There are critics of fake lore, suggesting that it's exploitative and inferior to folklore. Defenders say that the best examples of it are a long-standing tradition and worthwhile in their own right. To me, fake lore is simply a term used to describe folklore that is forced through the door instead of a natural progression of a legend. Although I then have to wonder when that line blurs and disappears. The tale of Bride and Seek was a song that was taken literally over time. A similar event happened with Bloody Mary, with much of its origins landing on the grounds of a game. Will there be a time when Slender Man's origins leave the area of general knowledge? And if this happens, would the legend left behind be considered an urban legend like many others? There were believers in Slender Man's existence after all. Many already know that Slender Man was a relatively recent creation, appearing for the first time on June 10th, 2009, in a post on the website Something Awful. Under the name of Victor Surge, Eric Knudsen photoshopped older images to create a being that held the impression of a creature that dated far back into human history. The thread was a Photoshop contest in which users were challenged to create paranormal images. Under the name of Victor, Eric posted 2 black and white images with groups of children in them. In the background of both, he had photoshopped a realistic-looking, tall humanoid amongst them, a thin, spectral figure wearing a black suit. To help paint the air with the atmosphere required, Eric added segments of text below each subsequent photograph, supposedly from witnesses, all describing the abductions of the group of children pictured, alongside the name given to the pretend mythological creature, the Slender Man. The quote under the images read, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but his persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983. Photographer unknown. Presumed dead." The second image read, "One of 2 recovered photographs from the Stirling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day in which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986. Photographer Mary Thomas. Missing since June 13th, 1986. Adding text to these eerie images was a genius move on Eric's part, resulting in the story spreading much further than he could ever have anticipated. The story of the Slender Man soon went viral, spawning numerous works and variations through fan fiction, fan art, Photoshop jobs, short films, cosplay, and a wide variety of online fiction known widely as creepypasta. In what seemed to be overnight, the Slender Man's story had left Eric Knudson's fingertips and had become a product of the world around him. The most compelling aspect of Slender Man was just how mysterious he was. There was enough information to draw you in, but with very little to hold you there confidently, resulting in you wishing to have more. This allowed it to have narratives and story arcs added to its existence, creating elements that you would find terrifying. Over time, the elements others enjoyed stuck to the legend, whilst those that did not pique the interest of the masses were dismissed. This led to a prevalent and robust narrative to merge around the mythos of Slender Man, with only its most substantial interpretations sticking to it. In a surprisingly swift turnaround, a YouTube series had begun the same year, created by a fan of the Slender Man narrative. Titled Marble Hornets, the series ran from 2009 to 2014, wherein the titular creature was instead titled The Operator. Since then, the character has appeared in the video game Slender, The 8 Pages in 2012, and its successor, Slender, The Arrival in 2013. It also stood as strong inspiration for the creation of the Enderman in the video game Minecraft. In 2015, the web series Marble Hornets was adapted into a feature film, and the legend was later brought to the silver screen in another film simply titled Slender Man. Knudson himself was inspired to create Slender Man by Zach Parsons' work of art titled That Insidious Beast, with elements of Stephen King's The Mist, alongside various other urban legends such as Shadow People, Mothman, and the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Other inspirations for the character were the Tall Man from the 1979 film Phantasm, H.P. Lovecraft's work, the surrealist work of William S. Burroughs, and the haunted horror video games of Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Knudson has been quoted as saying his intentions were to formulate something whose motivations can barely be comprehended and cause unease and terror in a general population. And although they've not been mentioned explicitly by Knudson as inspiration for the Slender Man, there are a few beings from fiction in the years leading up to the Slender Man's arrival that is worth noting. First is the Gentleman, black-suited, pale, bold demons from the 90s series Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the famously haunting episode Hush. There's also the existence of the Men in Black that appear so often in urban legends and conspiracy theories. Then there is also The Question, a DC Comics superhero with a blank face whose secret identity is Victor Sage, similar to Eric Knudson's pseudonym, Victor Surge. Any comparison to older legends is no different to what occurs with all stories, with connections being made that may or may not have been subconsciously helping the invention of this lanky child snatcher. there will always be similarities to things that have come in the past. This is the same with all stories. Folklorists will be able to note these and look further into them. Believers will use their confirmation bias to corroborate these previous stories as early incantations of the narrative, only solidifying its existence deeper into our history as if it had always been there. Professor Shira Chess of the University of Georgia made a connection in her book, Folklore, Horror Stories, and the Slender Man, the development of an internet mythology. The supposed connection being that of Slender Man and the ancient folklore of fairies. Like fairies, the Slender Man is otherworldly, with often difficult to understand motivations. Also, like fairies, his appearance is vague and often shifts to reflect what the viewer wants or fears to see. And much like fairies, the Slender Man calls the woods and wild places his home, where he lures or kidnaps children. The tall, suited creature with an undisclosed and not yet understood desire to take children has brought forward many names. He is known from his origins as the Slender Man, eventually known as simply Slender Man. Soon, he became accustomed to the Tall Man, the Thin Man, der Schlanke Man, Vier Dub, Schlankvold, a more playful tone in Slendy, the Pale One, the White King, Black King, or hauntingly, Master. A consistent trait of this being is that he behaves in what could be seen as a passive-aggressive manner, often stalking targets for many years before ever finally attacking, if he ever attacks. It is widely understood that he is more of a psychological power than a full-force attacker, often torturing his victims mentally over long periods, using fear and paranoia to drive them into the dark corners of insanity, always watching and yet not always visible. Living similarly to Mothman in what is believed to be a fourth-dimensional plane, which would account for some of the apparent abilities he uses with such subtle viciousness. He is almost always described as at least 7 to 8 feet tall, with extra appendages that are described as being like tentacles in shape and mannerisms. Although he is said to be sharp like swords, a creature of the shadow with no face. It is generally understood that he is always there, with the psychological effects often deteriorating the victim's mind as a result. It is clear to all that hear the tale of Slender Man, or to those who see its smart suit in images, that this is not a mindless beast on the hunt, but an intelligent, higher power with an agenda we will never truly understand. It is said that if its victim is a child, he will present himself in a friendly manner at first, attempting to gain their trust. To adults, it is different, as he stalks them, always there. These victims hold a common trait, that they would have all experienced a tragedy in their life at some point, one that Slender Man itself would have in fact caused. During this stalking of adult victims, they would slowly find themselves becoming sicker and sicker, with an illness that has been widely dubbed the name Slender Sickness, with symptoms including mass paranoia, nausea, nosebleeds, nightmares, and hallucinations. Eventually, Slender Man would finally abduct its victim, usually taking them or luring them to a nearby forest where it is assumed they are killed. In more sinister cases, where it is claimed the situation had got too bloody, Slender Man would remove evidence by burning down the place of the attack, often causing the death of others in the line of destruction, generally those close to the initial victim. Slender Man was the first fully fleshed legend born from the internet, a creature that spawned not from one place, but through many, like jigsaw pieces added from every corner of the world, with some fitting in place and others not, until eventually a fully fledged legend stood before us in its tall, black suit. a legend conceived by Eric Knudsen but born by the internet fandom. Media scholar and folklorist Andrew Peck attributes the success of Slender Man to its highly collaborative nature. Because the creature's motivations are shrouded in such mystery, users can easily adapt existing tropes and imagery to new stories and ideas. Urban legends work just like this, with elements that people like sticking and weaker aspects disappearing into the shadow of the campfire once first told. The spreading of the stories and the interest in the stranger aspects are no different to any other legend we have covered so far. The only real difference is that Slender Man happened so fast. The rise and fall of the tale of the Slender Man was a burning star amongst the dark sky of legends, going through every motion of a usual urban legend. In contrast, they usually take years to reach their heights until they are finally over the hill. Slender Man took mere months. With the speed of the internet age and how easy it was to become worldwide, it is not surprising that this happened, although it's fascinating to watch. There may be some debate on whether Slender Man's existence is folklore or fake lore. However, one thing is for sure. If you want to see the life cycle of an urban legend sped up to a speed where you can see it rise and fall right before your eyes, Slender Man is the perfect example. A word often associated with the existence of Slender Man is terror. He doesn't necessarily hunt, not in its simplest terms at least, nor does he seem to directly kill his victims. Instead, he encourages others to do it to please him. Now, we love the stories of Frankenstein and Dracula, although where they used to inflict terror on their audiences and readers, we all now understand that these beings are nothing more than gothic tales. Slender Man was an opportunity to bring back the idea of a mystical being amongst us, coming to life in our collective imagination. He does not make threats. He does not bang on your door to find you. He does not speak or shout or growl, and he does not have sharp teeth or glowing eyes. How are you supposed to read the intention of a being without a face? He lives in the corner of your eye, just out of sight in the shadows of the street corner, just deep enough in the woods to blend in. He's not real. You know that you're most likely just seeing things. But then, it steps into reality, and you have to get away from it. Only, there is no getting away. Slender Man is still there, waiting, standing, always watching. It was a fascinating, scary story that enticed, excited, enthralled, and terrified its readers of various ages. Although, for two particular young girls, the story of Slender Man meant far more than that. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing.
It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend.
On May the 31st, 2014, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, the two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser, walked into the woods of Davids Park with their close friend, Peyton Leitner, to play a game of hide and seek. During this time, Leitner was pinned down by her 12-year-old friends and stabbed 19 times in the arms, legs, and torso with a 5-inch blade. Morgan held the knife, committing to the attack, whilst Anissa urged her to continue from the side. 2 of her wounds were to major organs, with one wound missing her heart by less than a millimeter, whilst another cut through her diaphragm, cutting into her liver and stomach. The 2 girls told the young, dying victim that they would go and get help, but instead, they just continued to walk. This left young Peyton with no other option but to drag herself through the woods until she reached a nearby road, where she was luckily found by a cyclist who instantly called 911. Peyton and Morgan had become friends in the 4th grade since, according to reports, Peyton thought Morgan seemed lonely. Enjoying Morgan's sense of humor and imagination, Peyton would confirm that she considered her a best friend. In the 6th grade, Morgan's obsession with Slender Man had begun, an obsession that Peyton admitted she found odd. She would later say that, "It kind of frightened me a little bit, but I went along with it. I was supportive because I thought that's what she liked." As Morgan's belief in the Slender Man and his gruesome stories grew, Peyton began to pull away. Even though she knew it wasn't real, she was uncomfortable about it and considered ending the friendship. Although it wasn't just this that was putting Peyton off spending time with Morgan, as Morgan had also begun a friendship with another 6th grader named Anissa Wire. The girls had only recently met, but they lived in the same apartment complex and rode the bus together to and from school, bonding over their mutual love of Slender Man lore. Peyton later explained that she did not like Anissa and only hung out with her because she knew Morgan loved her, but considered Anissa always cruel to her and believed she was jealous that she and Morgan were friends. Around this time, Anissa and Morgan had begun to fall into the belief that Slender Man could contact them telepathically, alongside the notion that he dwelled in an abandoned mansion a rough 5-hour drive away from their hometown. With this shared delusion, the 2 began to plot. The plan was that, by murdering Peyton, they could prove that Slender Man was real and would be invited to become his proxies. They had quickly fallen so deep into this belief that they had built a genuine fear that if they did not kill Peyton, Slender Man would come to hurt them and their loved ones. Anissa would later testify, saying, "I believed if I didn't go through with the plan, Slender Man would come and attack and kill myself, my friends, and my family, those that I care about the most." And with this, the 2 young girls had put together at least 3 plans for the murder of Peyton, but they were often met with setbacks inside and outside of their control. On May the 30th, 2014, the 3 girls celebrated Morgan's 12th birthday. They would go to a roller skating rink before getting frozen yogurt, eventually setting in for a sleepover, where Peyton remained unaware that Morgan and Anissa were planning her murder. The current plan was to duct tape Peyton's mouth while she slept before stabbing her in the neck. But in a sentence that reminds us of their young age, the girls were too sleepy to go through with it after such a big day. By the following morning, playtime had begun again. As Peyton changed into her pink dress, Morgan and Anissa set up a new plan. They would take her to the park and kill her in a bathroom stall where the drain could wash away her blood. Usually, the girls wouldn't be allowed to go to the park without adult supervision, but as it was Morgan's birthday, her mother allowed the girls to enjoy the sunny morning outside alone. The girls went out, but before they did, either Anissa or Morgan grabbed a knife from Morgan's mother's kitchen. I say either, as later on, both would deny this action, instead blaming it on the other. Once they arrived at the bathroom stalls at the park, the girls pulled out of the murder once more, this time growing nervous and anxious about the crime they were planning. Although, they did not give up. They decided to lure Peyton into the nearby woods for bird watching and a game of hide and seek. Anissa would later say of their plan, "Morgan and I were going to be like lionesses chasing down a zebra. I was going to tackle her, and then Morgan was going to do the stabbing." As part of the game, Anissa told Peyton to lie on the ground and cover herself with sticks and leaves before walking back a few feet, eventually shouting, "Now!" And with this, Morgan appeared, tackling Peyton to the ground and pinning her down whilst the attack finally took place. Peyton lay there dying on the ground whilst the two 12-year-old attackers blankly stared down at her, with her last words to Morgan being, "I trusted you," and "I hate you." Luckily, the attempted murder was a failure. And although the psychological and physical scars would potentially last forever on her body and mind, her recovery was miraculous. She could leave the hospital only a week after the attack. The two girls would be picked up by the police, who were now making their way towards what they believed to be Slender Man's mansion to find refuge. There is, of course, far more to the story of these young girls and what happened next, with it being revealed that Morgan had been living with unmedicated, unwatched, and undiagnosed schizophrenia alongside a court case that would live amongst the zeitgeist of infamy for years to come. This and more are covered far more in depth in the 2-hour HBO documentary Beware the Slender Man, where you can find out far more than I am willing to divulge here. The belief in this legend had grown dangerous for these two young girls, who found themselves amongst a perfect storm of delusion, darkness, and naivety. Now the demonization of Slender Man, creepypasta, and horror stories had arrived. The creepypasta wiki was blocked through the Waukesha School District. The creator of Slender Man publicly stated, "I am deeply saddened by the tragedy in Wisconsin, and my heart goes out to the families of those affected by this terrible act." Slosh Train, the administrator of the creepypasta wiki, also stated that the stabbing was an isolated incident that did not accurately represent the creepypasta community, and that the creepypasta wiki was a literary website and that they did not condone murder or satanic rituals. To prove this, mixed with the understanding of their connection to the crime, the creepypasta community held a 24-hour live stream on YouTube to raise money for Peyton's medical treatment. As is to be expected with these events, the media did not tell the story of two young girls with a shared delusion that led to a horrible event. Instead, the focus was on the more sellable and exciting idea of Slender Man inadvertently coming to life through the crime of two young girls. This would lead to stories being run in the hyperbolic manner once seen during the satanic panic of the 80s. Up and down the United States of America, parents worried about the potential dangers the story of Slender Man might pose to their children's safety, as if the story itself was able to create killers. A week later, WLWT-TV reported that an unidentified woman from Cincinnati, Ohio, had been attacked by her 13-year-old daughter with a knife. They explained that her daughter had also written macabre fiction, with some notably involving the existence of Slender Man, who the mother claimed motivated the attack. Although with no accurate information about the reality of this, mixed with the understanding that this was a week after the three girls had become world famous alongside the tall creature, it is best to take this with a pinch of salt. A couple of months later, on September the 4th, 2014, a 14-year-old girl in Port Richey, Florida, allegedly set her family's house on fire whilst her mother and 9-year-old brother were inside. Police would later report that the teenager had recently been reading online stories about Slender Man. Eddie Daniels of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office said, "The girl had visited the website that contains a lot of the Slender Man information and stories. It would be safe to say there is a connection to that. However, I would argue that Officer Daniels misunderstands the notions of correlation and causation." The stabbings resulted in extensive debate about the role of the internet in society and its effects on children. Russell Jack, Waukesha police chief, said that the stabbing should be a wake-up call for all parents, adding that the internet is full of misinformation and wonderful sites that teach and entertain, but it can also be full of dark and wicked things. In contrast, Assistant Professor Shira Chess stated that creepypasta was no more dangerous than stories about vampires or zombies. He argued that creepypasta websites were, in fact, beneficial and that they gave people the opportunity to become better writers. And whilst the need to find an active villain in the confusing events resulted in specific demographics growing fearful of the fictional being of the Slender Man, the opposite was happening amongst the community of scary stories, as the interest in the tall man was beginning to fade. At first glance, it may seem as though the tragedy of the events sucked the fun out of the Slender Man legend, although, realistically, if anything, it makes the story that little bit more real and frightening. It seemed that, due to this event, mixed in with the video games and copycats that had spread so far around the world, Slender Man was no longer hiding in the shadows. He was now part of the general world, stepping out from the dark corners of the scary story websites. He was now a movie character, a costume for cosplayers, sucking all the mystery out of its existence daily. The blogs dedicated to the being had begun to log off for good, and the websites had begun to shut down. Nobody fears Freddy Krueger anymore, as they feel they know him, that everyone knows who he is. The same seems to have happened to our haunting friend, the Slender Man. Although after the stabbings had occurred, there was a notable increase in depictions of Slender Man being more of a benevolent presence, now being portrayed as an anti-hero who protected victimized children from bullies, although still with violent means. A daughter was even introduced amongst some circles with Skinny Sally, a young girl covered in cuts and bruises, and this does seem to be, although it's not confirmed, a reaction to the demonization of it due to the previous events. By the time Sony Pictures released the film Slender Man in 2018, it was met with a wide variety of criticism from several angles. Bill Wire, the father of Anissa, stated, "It's absurd they want to make a movie like this. All we're doing is extending the pain all three of these families have gone through." The progressive advocacy group Care 2 created an online petition to demand the film not be released, receiving over 19,000 signatures, calling it a naked cash grab built on the exploitation of a deeply traumatic event and the people who lived it. Sony representatives insisted that the film was made for the fans of the original legend and was not inspired by the attempted murder of the young girl a few years before. That said, the fans of the original legend were not impressed either, with their criticisms being that the time of Slender Man was over. The third batches of criticism were about the film itself, with it being almost consistently panned by all worldwide viewers, with critics claiming it to be the final nail in the coffin of the Slender Man. He was a being that was able to take away children in stories, until the day that its very notion led to the taking away of 2 children and almost killing a third. It is a being of folklore that somehow managed to accomplish its goal without ever genuinely stepping into the real world. And
Although it may seem to be buried and gone, there is one thing we must remember. Folklore never truly dies.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.